Hi everyone. I was looking around online for terrain making videos and I was looking for the 1 to 285th scale. I didn't see too much out there, so I decided I was going to go ahead and give it a shot and make my own. So this is my first attempt making a terrain board, and using all the basic materials that everyone else has kind of said on the forums. Start out with a piece of styrofoam. I'm actually using the wrong type of styrofoam, but it's the ball type, not the super styrene, and that's mounted with pegs and super glue on, or not super glue, hot glue on a quarter-inch MDF board. Pretty cheap components. I think for both pieces it cost me maybe $10 at like Home Depot. So then what I did is I went ahead and got this all mounted, carved out some areas. You can see kind of there's like a little valley right here. Built a hill on top and then kind of onto another hill. So what I did is I went ahead and mounted those via styrofoam and just the same method, hot glue, and then we covered it with, what is it? It's called joint sealer, or it's the kind of drywall stuff you put on to cover. I think it's called joint compound. Use it to cover like holes in your walls or whatever. It was like $7 for a bucket, again at Home Depot. So kind of building this on a budget. So I went ahead and covered everything in plaster or joint compound, and that gave me a nice surface to work with, kind of instead of putting all this terrain and everything directly onto the styrofoam. I went ahead and did that, and then I'll give you a different view, I guess. Then we went ahead and covered it with sand, just a mixture of water and white glue, just Elmer's PVA glue, and hit the whole board with that, and then kind of put sand on top of it to give it this textured look. Then it's primed, and we're getting ready to move on to the next step of painting. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to go ahead and paint a dark brown over it and kind of just wash it over, really light, thin coating, kind of let it seep into the crevices and everywhere. That's why I kind of like starting with the black underbase. If you miss some areas, it's not going to show through too badly. Just to kind of give you an example, this is my test piece that I was working on earlier. If I can grab that, I can't get that one-handed. But yeah, it will hopefully turn out like that, with that kind of texture, that kind of coloring and flocking and everything. So, and then next to it you can kind of see my miniature army. These are using GHQ 1 285th scale World War II miniatures. So again, I didn't really see much out there for terrain building, so taking a shot at it. So hopefully you guys can learn something, and I'm going to go ahead and shoot another video when I get this thing painted and kind of do a step-by-step from there. So hopefully that goes well. Alright, so I went ahead and got my board painted. I ended up going with 3 different shades of brown. You can kind of see I kind of do everything in layers. I start with the darkest and do a real thin layer. Actually, let me show you the paints I use real quick. These are the 3 paints I use in order of light to dark. I just use cheap dollar craft paints. You can pick them up at Walmart, wherever other hobby stores have them. You can kind of see the color range there. So what I do is the board is primed black with just spray paint primer over sand, and what I do is I take the darkest one first, really water it down and kind of ink it almost, and run it over everything. That's how you can kind of get in those deep recesses. And then next one, I get a bigger brush, kind of hit everything with a regular brown, and let's see. After that, you kind of touch that area up, kind of make sure there's no splashes or anything. I know this kind of looks splotchy, but it's meant that way. I ended up actually using a pretty different technique than I thought I was. I was originally just going to go for regular just brush coverage, you know, kind of just sweeping along like this, but instead I ended up using stippling, where you kind of just poke at it with the larger brush. So that ended up giving me better coverage and just a better overall look. So I did that for the main coverage with the medium brown, and then the last brown, which is the lightest one, I don't know, you can kind of tell is it goes from darkest to the dark brown to the medium brown, and then the last light brown is actually dry brushed on there. And dry brushing, I just literally get a nice light coat of it and just kind of brush over lightly. Not a ton of paint on there. And it just really kind of brings out those the highlights in the rocks. It'll just pick up the bigger rocks. It's kind of hard to tell in this, but some areas are definitely more highlighted than others. But it just really gives you that 3-color kind of tone. It makes it look like there's actually varied terrain. And again, this whole board is going to be flocked, and I mean not entirely covered, but for the most part there will be some dirt and whatnot going through in some areas, such as in this kind of ridge here. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do in here, but I think that's pretty much going to be left open. We're going to throw some bocage on here. There's going to be a town added up top, and that test piece is actually going to be mounted on over in this area over here. So we're going to go ahead and see how that goes. I think the next step is going to just start working on terrain and getting the other stuff on the board. As you can kind of see, I got some houses painted earlier. So these are going to be added in kind of terrain format. So you can kind of get an idea of the scale here. It's going to be about like that. So I think we're going to do some bocage in the middle. I'm still working out on what technique I want to use for that. So I will go ahead and update this when I get the chance, and I get that stuff done, which will probably be by tomorrow. Alright, I went ahead and got the base of the bocage laid. So what I did for this step is I'm kind of just building a little bocage enclosure for a small farmyard or whatever. So as you can see, it's kind of just some small gravel. I went ahead and hot glued it down in the set pattern, just kind of, laying a trail and then hitting it every few inches or whatever. If you're doing this along with me or whatever, be prepared for some sticky fingers. It gets quite warm. So what I found worked best was to just kind of do small sections at a time, just like about that much. And then literally just lay the glue down and kind of just pile up the rocks like right on top of it and crunch them down. So that's kind of that outlook. This is step 1. I think I'm going to go ahead and start doing some basing now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add some really fine gravel or some ballast to this. And that's about this size, if you can kind of see. It's kind of hard for the camera. There it goes. So we're going to go ahead and do some regular glue with some white PVA glue on here and kind of cover it. As you might be able to see, there's a little bit of hot glue coming off, and the strings will definitely be cleaned up. But what we're going to do is we're going to hit this all with the white glue, lay some ballast down over the top of it, and that's really going to kind of act as these smaller rocks that go over it. And that's going to just really help give us a nice blend into our turf when we start adding on the actual bocage part of it. And for those of you that don't know, I'm assuming most of you do, but bocage is basically the quote-unquote hedgerows in the Normandy from World War II. So what that is it's basically farmers would clear their fields of rocks for plowing, and they would just put them on the side, and over time these rocks would build up and kind of get soil, and they would accumulate weeds and all sorts of undergrowth on there, and they became these really thick centers of defense for the Germans used to hold back the Americans in Normandy. So we're going to go ahead and, like I said, design a small bocage yard. I'm not 100% sure if one of the houses is going in here yet, or if they're all going up on top of the hill, but we'll kind of play that by ear. As you can see my kind of test piece next to it. Let me show you kind of for scale too. There's a Sherman next to the kind of bocage height. This is going to, of course, be closed in a little bit more and a little bit taller. But that's just a kind of idea for what kind of scale we're working with here. So these are pretty big. I mean, they're definitely serious obstacles to overcome. So I will go ahead and get that done, and I will update this video on the next step. Alright, so here we have the next step. What I did is I went ahead and kind of did the base layer and blended it just quickly with some very fine ballast. You can kind of see that. So this is just a quick update. I think next up we're going to hit it with some, what's it called? Can't decide whether I want to do the flock or I want to do the actual bocage part of it and the clump foliage. So I will update that soon.